Hello and welcome to the second session today for the VegFest UK Online December 12th, 13th event. Today we have the theme of animal rights, so we've got 6 sessions looking at animal rights and associated areas. They're all on our website, vegfest.co.uk, so if you're watching this and it sparks some interest, you'd like to see some more, go to the vegfest.co.uk website, and on there, under the live streams, December, you'll see a whole animal rights, you'll see a number of fabulous conversations. And indeed, this conversation we're about to have is going to be a real highlight of this weekend. We're going to be joined by 2 guests, and we're going to be looking in particular really at this book here, Ethical Vegan. And I'm thrilled to be joined by not only the author, Jordi Casamitjana, but also one of our colleagues, Joel Bravette, who's going to be asking Jordi a number of questions about the book. Very much raised some interesting areas. You can access this book, obviously you can buy it, read it, you can buy it from the Viva shop, amongst other places. But there's also the book launch that we did, conversation. There'll be a further conversation later today with Jordi and members of the people who are involved with the case. So it's quite a big story, but without further ado, let's introduce Jordi. First of all, Jordi Casamitjana, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And I'm also going to bring in Joel Bravette, or Jay Brave as we know him. Jay, thanks for joining us. Here we go. Jordi, it's your book, so you should have the honours of saying hello and introducing yourself.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. Thanks for allowing me to have this conversation about my book. Any author would dream with a situation like that, publishing a book and then be able to talk about it and answer questions of people that read the book and they find it interesting. That is ideal. So thanks very much for giving me this opportunity, which I'll try my best to answer the questions in the best honest way I can. Some I might be successful, some I might fail. That's the beauty of live video broadcasting.
And thank you, Tim.
And we're very happy to be joined by yourself, Joel. Joel, you're going to be asking some questions for Jordi. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and how come you're sat here.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, again, thank you, Tim, for the warm introduction. As you did 10 days ago when Jordi's book actually launched, and we had the conversation here as part of a VegFest program too. Well, I'm here again as somebody who people, when they do hopefully choose to either read or purchase or get hold of this book somehow or other, will see that I have actually contributed a paragraph at the beginning just to kind of congratulate Jordi on a book well written, because since I had the opportunity to read this book, it has actually, I suppose, brought up a lot of questions for me on my own journey towards a more ethical veganism. I mean, my path to veganism, I've been vegan now for coming up to 5 years, but it was born of a number of different reasons, a mixture of the animals, the environment, sustainability at large, health. But I think the ethical view on veganism definitely brings everything together in a way that I'm looking forward to discussing with Jordi today.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Jay. And Jordi, yes, you are. I mean, you've written a book that has sparked a lot of interest, and I can say that we're genuinely here, absolutely thrilled to see it. It's a fascinating story behind the book, but today we're not going to be looking at that. We're really going to be looking at some issues raised. Joel, I know you've got a number of issues and questions to ask Jordi, and Jordi's just going to be, put on the spot a bit and open up, which is really interesting. Thanks for doing that, Jordi. It's an example, though, of what we want to see more of, which is really informed, supportive, challenging, critique, questions, but kind, supportive, and with a view to helping all of us gain a bit of further understanding, spark some curiosity, ask some questions as much as give any answers. So on that note, I shall leave you both to it for about an hour, and then I'm going to come back in. Can I just check? Can I just clarify, Jordi? I'm pretty sure, Joe, I'm pretty sure it's a yes, but there may well be some questions in the comments section, and it may be that we leave that for later, and you may want to revisit after the talk and perhaps answer those questions. Jordi, especially if I can see you nodding, so that's great. And Jay, I'm sure you'll be happy to have a look at those, perhaps contribute. But if people listening want to ask questions, you're very welcome. Put them in the comments section. If they're not addressed during this hour, they'll be addressed later. On that note, lovely Jordi, Joel, I'm going to be sat there listening, but I will sit here in the background.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much. Well, thank you again, Jordi, for your time. As I just kind of said in that brief introduction, I was very grateful to have been included in the early readers of your book when it was still a manuscript. And like I was saying, I had a chance to read the book probably 2 months before it came out to the public on December the 3rd, 10 days ago. But for me, it raised a number of different questions, some of those which I'm very much looking forward to getting into. However, the first thing I was going to ask you is, your book has been out for 10 days now. How has the general response been so far?
Well, so far so good. I mean, obviously when you publish a book, you try to promote it and get it out there. And these days you have social media to do these things. Years ago, you only could go to a bookshop and sign books. That's the only thing you could do, or get an article in the paper. Of course, there is a team in the publishing, September publisher, that is still trying to get it further, to get it to the media. But from a point of view of getting it through the social media, it's been quite well received. I always quite satisfied when people post a picture of them receiving the book in Facebook or in Twitter, or open it, or a paragraph of it, which I encourage everyone to do it, because that kind of tells me which is the bits that people like the most, and which is the bits that, because you never know when you write a book how it's going to affect different audiences, and it's that information now that is interesting for me, the effects of the book. But so far so good. I'm quite happy.
That's excellent news. Well, I've also, so I think, like I also just mentioned in that little heads up at the beginning, I do have a couple of topical questions, but all of the questions that I have today, some from myself, others that have been sent to me, others that when I told people who I would be talking to today, may not put them in the public forum, but said to make sure that I asked. But what I did was I made sure that I wrote them down so I can ask them as specifically and get the wording on them correct. So bear with me, and bear with me, us all audience, if you do see my eyes flicker. I'm just reading some of those questions to make sure that I ask them correctly. I think at large though, with the book, and again, just to kind of remind people so they can see the book here as well, I'm going to urge people to read the book and find out about your personal and political journey, and particularly the highly publicized court case, which I think people are going to hear about in this afternoon's conversation. And I'm going to let them find out from there, because I think what's going to pique the most interest is an exploration of your ethical vegan philosophy and how adoptable and adaptable it is. And so I'm just going to jump in with the most topical question that I felt I was sent, and that is with regards to vaccines, and particularly the COVID-19 vaccination. As with most discoveries and developments in the world of vaccinations, non-human biological matter will have contributed to the creation process. Can vaccinations be vegan, or are we looking at this all wrong, especially considering that this virus is alleged to be zoonotic in its origins anyway?
Yeah, this is the question. I kind of expected this one because it's the question everybody wants to know. And I do talk about vaccines in the book. There's a section about health. But this specific question of can vaccines be vegan, the answer is yes. So the only reason the vaccines are not vegan is because either have animal ingredients from animal origin, or they've been tested on animals. And this is not a prerequisite to create a vaccine. You could create a vaccine without any animal product, and you could decide not to test on animals. However, the regulations at the moment oblige many of the jurisdictions when vaccines are developed, oblige this testing. But that doesn't mean that it has to be like this forever. Or it doesn't mean that it's a condition for a vaccine to work. No, a vaccine could be tested in humans, could be tested in other ways. There's a lot of research going on in trying to find alternatives to testing. And these alternatives could be done by cells, human cells in the lab, could be done with computers, could be done with microchips. There's a lot of avenues to develop, which with time, I hope, will produce an alternative that is not just feasible, but is acceptable by the establishment. We're not quite there yet, but from the point of view of the question, yes, they can. Now, I guess that the reader or the person who posed the question wanted to know more specifically about the COVID vaccine itself. So I don't know all the COVID vaccines that have been developed. I presume that many of them, if not all, will have animal products in them. And I also presume that many of them, if not all, have been tested on animals. On that premise, they are not vegan friendly, but neither is most of the medication that we get from the general doctors, which also often contains animal products, which also often are tested on animals. So they are not different than any other medication. Should we, as a vegans, reject medications? I would say no, because the whole idea of being vegan is to be vegan in this society, not to be vegan isolated from society, to normalize veganism, not to exceptionalize it. So that's why the Vegan Society definition had that element of as far as possible and practical. Sometimes it's not possible or practical because the alternative cannot be developed, or they are very difficult to achieve for particular people in particular circumstances. So from all the choices we have, perhaps medicines is the one we still have to go a long way before we find alternatives for vegans. And that doesn't mean that we can reject vaccination or medication. But I would not treat vaccinations differently than medication in this respect. They all had that price to pay. But the difference with vaccination is the vaccination might affect others. So the whole purpose of vaccination is to prevent a disease to spread, not just your own health, but the health of others. And in that component, it makes it more vegan than other type of medications, because all medications that are just for you, then you can say, okay, I'm a sentient being. The whole idea of veganism is do no harm to sentient beings. I'm a sentient being too. It makes sense to have a medicine for me. But a medicine, a vaccination is not just for you, it's for everybody else. It's a preventive medicine. And we often complain about modern medicine, Western medicine, saying that only treats the symptoms, never treats the cause, it's not holistic. And then we look at the East and we say it's more holistic, it's more preventive. Well, vaccinations is one of those preventive components of modern Western medicine. So from those that only treat the symptoms, this is preventive. But it's also, diet is also preventive. It's also lifestyle is also preventive. This is not the only one. That means the case of vaccination is a perfect dilemma case. It's really a dilemma case, because whether if you don't vaccinate, you might do harm to others. If you're infecting them, you get infected. If you do vaccinate and support an industry that still uses animal products and tests on animals, you are not using the alternatives that are vegan friendly. So it's really a conundrum. So I would say the answer would be, well, each vegan will have to find their own answer. When there are gray areas like that, there is no single rule that applies to all. The circumstances of everyone will have to be applied. And that includes the vaccines. Each vaccine will be a little bit different. Not all the vaccines will be treated in the same way. Not all the vaccines might have animal products. Not all the vaccines might be as effective as others. So you have to really use the information you have at the time and make your decision. So there is no rule about this is what vegans should do. The only thing that is a rule is vegans should consider everyone, including the animals tested, including the ingredients, including themselves, including other humans, and be sure that whatever they choose is the option that prevents doing more harms to others.
I think that's weird. It's quite a complete, but also as well quite a diplomatic answer. Been able to, I mean, which is good. I mean, this is. I mean, I suppose it leads on to me for a question that I had based on my reading of the book, and that was about your belief that research and development built on the back of oppression, whether that be, say, Impossible Burgers using rats or cosmetic companies testing on other animals, that it doesn't hold up to ethical scrutiny. And I kind of wonder if that previous question and then a question about that kind of ethical scrutiny here, like where your kind of like pendulum swings and lands, because ultimately you're right that the future can involve like nanotechnology or non-sentient ways, or even, as you said, like, you know, using artificial intelligence combined with like human cells to be able to create vaccines or could be able to research and develop in these areas. However, to have got to that point is going to have been built on a pyramid of human and animal oppression. And I just wonder, like, what your belief is with regards to having that as a primary Kickstarter, even if the future holds options that no longer need to have that as their basis, because ultimately that was the basis. If you look at, like, you know, the makeup of like much of modern medicine, like, I mean, even gynecology, for example, which has a very close to my heart because of the father of modern gynecology discovered most of his practices on who are now African American women, but were enslaved Africans, and they discovered much of that in very heinous ways. If someone was to go and look back into it, and so I just wonder, like, yeah, where you sit on that, and like where the kind of the cutoff would be.
This is actually an excellent question, because it is not easy to arrive to a conclusion what to choose if you have to consider all factors, not just the ingredients, how it was made, how it was transported, who invented it, who was the brother of the person that invented it. Perhaps he was a vivisectionist or a slave trade. What the connections are so big, the more information you put, the more reasons you will find not to use a product. So therefore, it's a problem. It's a problem for a vegan that has to make these decisions to start to realizing the connections from the past and present. The way I deal with it, which I don't claim that is the right way. It's just a simple way I negotiate these difficulties. All the vegans, we have difficulties, and there is no profit out there. Everybody find their ways with information they have. The way I kind of help me to address this issue is to make a distinction between past and future. So the decision I have to make is now, in the present. And I have information about how this product was made from the past. So which part of that information I will use to make a decision whether I use the product or not. So in order to answer this question, I look at the future. I look how my choice will affect future choices for me or for other people looking at me making that choice. And I think that is the important aspect to look at. If we're talking about a product that has a history of animal or exploitation or human exploitation, but that history is no longer present, so that historical element, you can't help it. It's there, it's in the past. You can't change the past. And if you look at almost everything we use, we'll have that history. No matter what we use, any product, you go back, you'll find somebody being exploited, an animal, a human. So because it's the structure of the society we live for centuries has all these negative elements that generate the society and all its products. So therefore, we are already here in this world. We cannot go back and erase that. So almost everything we have here had that connection. But the important is, if the connection is still now, if it's still in the present, and if for me choosing that product will reinforce that connection. Because if it does reinforce that connection, it legitimizes it. It gives them support. So other new people might say, I'm going to do the same thing that people did in the past. Then that's the wrong choice. So the idea is make a choice that give lessons to the new people that trying to develop new products, that trying to develop new medicines, trying to develop new food, to realize that they should not go in the route that the past people used, human exploitation, animal exploitation. They should find an alternative. So the message is there anybody now listening and developing these things? So if they are, I want you to know I won't buy your products if you do what we used to do before. And if in order for you to learn this, I have to boycott your present products. Now that's what I have to do. But it doesn't happen because there's nobody already trying to go back to those times. Then there's no point to dwell in the past. You need to look at the future. It's all about changing the world. And changing the world is changing practices that we don't want to do anymore. It's not just complain about what we used to do before. So I think you can find a way to resolve this conflict by looking at the future and looking at the message you're sending when you make a choice.
So, I mean, it's a slight segue from, like, you know, the central topic of ethical veganism, but I suppose the tenets of capitalism kind of come into that as well, quite largely, because, as you said, it's about those kind of connections to the past, and you're hoping, or in that kind of like in the answer that you gave, you're talking about there being some things they happened in the past, but now we can look to a new future. However, like you also mentioned in your initial point, if say somebody's all of their R&D was funded by the fact that their brother, or they're from a nation which is kind of still in essence a colonial power. And the only reason they were able to even like have the resources to discover or make something is because of a connection to the past, which still kind of like travels forward into today. I mean, the conversation I'm having here really is about like European colonial wealth, which again, as you all know, in Spain, in France, in the UK in particular, still has a very large connection to the wealth of today. For example, in the UK, it was only in 2010, I believe, or it could have been even later, 2015, that we stopped paying compensation to the slave owners through our taxes. And so these legacies of the past are very much with us in the here and now today. And so I just kind of like wonder, like, how do we, and again, especially as intersectional vegans, how do we like weigh that up and like decide at what point the cutoff of the past is and the future begins?
Well, it's impossible to know that line in a general way for anything. I think you will have to apply it at case-by-case basis, depending on the intensity or how recent the connection was, how intense was, how different that practice that we consider ethical today. But I think there are two ways of looking at it. One is the message. Be sure that if you still use part of the system, you never forget the message, never go back to those times, and never forget the message. We still are still there. We haven't disappeared. That imperialism, capitalist world still is here. So we have a way to go. So as long as you know which direction you go in and you make choices to maximize going faster than slower towards the goal, then you make it a good choices. But you should also kind of think about communicating to the people that produces the things. And I do often write to companies that they might, I mentioned this in the book, they might not be 100% vegan because, I don't know, one of the products they produce, they give it to a farm to feed pigs. And I write them to make a point, I'm not going to use your products until you stop that. So for me, the important thing is not stopping using the products, is to write them and to let them know they lost the client. So next time they have to make a choice, they have that message from me in their minds. So that's an important part of the way to deal with this. Communicate to the world, to those that make choices, to those that decide to exploit others, that this is no longer available, this is no longer okay. And although it happened in the past, that doesn't justify it should happen in the present. So there is a price to pay these days if you get stuck to those practices and you need to move away. But again, it's all looking at the future, looking at teaching the society to help to transform the society away from those practices. And in some cases, it's going to take a long time to do that because we're still in those practices, 100%. In others, we start to talk about it, but just talk about it, but we're still doing them. And many of the things about human oppression are still like that, like slavery, things like that. Yeah, the fact that we're laws that abolish slavery doesn't mean the slavery is gone. So there are many elements there that still needs to happen. But it obviously is a good step, but it's not the last step. It's just one of the steps, and we need to keep push the agenda in that direction. The same thing happened with veganism. So you cannot dwell in the past and then suddenly stop progress because of that. Because then you can associate veganism with lack of progress or lack of science or being exceptional, being in an island, a vegan island, not connected with the reality of the world. It's the opposite. We just need to be in every household. It should be a vegan. Doesn't matter if it's the father, the mother, the sister. It should be one at the beginning to make them all vegan in the end. And so we just need to spread to all worlds, societies, groups, businesses, industries, productions, this message of, yeah, there is a background, you are there here because that background, but the future is for us to choose. And now we can choose to change ways of doing things. Please do change them, because if you don't, I'll move elsewhere. So that is a communication exercise we're dealing here. It's not just a boycotting exercise for my own privilege. It's a boycotting to communicate the message so you don't have to boycott things again. So that's the idea.
Well, that kind of brings us to another like very timely and topical question then, because quite future facing, and I mean, some would say for ethical reasons, but I mean, others would say for economic reasons. But in the past few weeks, there's been a big publicity push regarding the approval of cultured or lab-grown meats as a solution to traditional animal agricultural practices. They've been billed as a win-win for humans and animals alike, but I wonder what you think.
I always been against lab-grown meat, not just now. From the very beginning, 10 years ago, when the concept appeared, I already went public against it. Doesn't mean that I don't think it should exist, because it does help some people to move away from animal agriculture and to animal products. If it helps in any shape or form, fine. What I mean being against is that I don't consider it suitable with my ethical beliefs in veganism, therefore I would not consume them myself. But as I say in the book, I don't claim that I have the way of looking at veganism that is the one everybody should follow. Everybody's capable to make their own decisions in that regard and interpret or manifest their belief in the same way. The veganism belief, core belief, is the same for all, avoiding the exploitation of all animals no matter the exploitation, no matter which animals. But how that is manifested, that's what varies from people to people, because not everybody has the same circumstances that allow them to manifest it in exactly the same way. And it might be somebody that is addicted to meat and the meat concept, that the only way to get away from an animal meat production is to use this alternative. However, I'm against it from also a point of view of supporting it, because I think the message it doesn't really lead us to the vegan world that we all vegans want to live or want to help to create for the future generations. Because we keep saying meat is we don't need it, it's not healthy, there are many better alternatives, and then somebody tries to reproduce the meat that we're trying to say is not healthy. It's not that we don't have alternatives. There are alternatives. It's not that humans need that taste of meat, of blood, or that taste of death to enjoy life. No, we can move away to any shapes and forms related to animal exploitation. And I'm sure that the vegan future that we all dream, that idea of meat, even the word meat, might be not used at all. Anything that reminds you a little bit of that industry that we now live today, that for us is natural, but in the future will be an unbelievable thing for people to think that we live in this way. So these concepts that imitate meat will not be there because we won't need it. But of course, we're still in this world now. So I would say the lab meat is the perfect campaign for the meat industry, is the perfect campaign for the carnies, seeing the threat of, oh, the vegans are growing, our products have been now competing with other alternatives, how are we going to survive? The lab meat gives the solution. So if you were a PR person in charge of the carnies world, I would say the lab meat will be your best bet. That's why I don't support it, because when you are in a struggle, you tend not to support the people that fights against you. But I can see that it has some advantages, but I would not ever get close. To be honest, I don't even try to get closer to those vegan burgers and those vegan sausages that are very similar in taste and shape to the original thing, even if they don't have any animal products, even if they are not from an animal cell. I don't like it. It reminds me too much to that food.
For example, stuff like a vegan steak, but what? Surely not burgers and sausages and stuff too? Or
well, there are many types. There are many burgers, but the ones that I like is the ones that they don't really taste like meat. They don't really smell like meat. They smell quite different. They only have this same shape, but they're quite, that's the one I like. The ones that I started to remind, oh, anything that make me wonder, is this meat? I don't want to even get closer. And because perhaps it is meat. So imagine in a world where this vegan meat, lab meat develops, and is so identical to real animal meat. How are you going to know when you go to a burger place that say, no, don't worry, this is one of the lab ones? How are you going to know as a vegan that you have to make that choice? I think they're pulling my leg. I think this is an animal one. You don't want that. You don't want vegan food, cruelty-free food, similar to cruelty-full food or non-vegan food. You want it to be very different, so you can tell immediately if they are not the things that you want. And just that's the only way that these products that are animal related will phase out, when people will immediately reject them and they choose the alternative. But you need to tell them apart in order to reject them. If any work to not tell them apart, I don't think it helps us. That's my view.
Interesting. So I mean, it's funny because I felt that as much as I am also, I'm not the biggest fan of these like lab grown cultured meats, but I also, like you, see for if there was a PR department for the carnists at large, this is a great opportunity, because obviously what also comes from a lab grown or cultured meat is no longer the need for the land, but also no longer the need for antibiotics and all of the other kind of like side businesses and industries that kind of come off of animal agriculture, which have such a devastating effect. And ultimately, it would then leave the carnist with the question of, if you don't prefer this, if they've managed to get the taste, the texture, everything the same as the traditionally farmed animal agricultural meat or livestock, again, as you said, all these words. For somebody to say that they would prefer the old would be to literally have now refined the question to, you need, basically the only difference is murder. The only difference is the animals had to die. And so is what you're asking for to say that you want the traditional way, do you need to know that that death was part of the process of your food? Or, and so in that sense, I see it could pose that great binary question that could move people away from it totally. But as you said, at the same time, you've like covered over one problem and created a new one.
Yeah, and also think in the future. It's always good to think in the future. Imagine that future world that you always dream. It's good to imagine how that would work. And anytime that you do advance in any progress, in any social movement, there are setbacks. Sometimes you advance to fit. You don't want to be in a situation in the future when we have a vegan world and suddenly there is a revolution and let's all go back to produce animal products. Why? Because still people are using this word meat. Still people are using this word sausages and burgers. But now imagine my alternative future. That future that people, you said the word meat, they say, what? I never heard about this. Oh yeah, 5 centuries ago, people used to eat these things. Oh, that's ridiculous. So that world is not gonna go back. So you wanna move so far from this horrible reality that we live, that you don't want to have the shapes, the colors, the smells related to it. So we have to have them now. And it's good that this exists to move away from it. But we need to start building for that future, try to move away from that. And it's not going to help if we perpetuate the infrastructure, either intellectual or physical, of exploitation. We need to eliminate that infrastructure in the world and in our brains as well.
Yeah, I agree too. I think that is a very important thing for people to, whether it's something they do already, to try and do, and that's that kind of creative visualization of a future. Because sometimes when we look at things through such a singular lens, you can forget that, like, you know, that our experience of life isn't one-dimensional. It is so multifaceted, and to not consider all of those other facets is often a hiding to nothing. You're correct. But coming back from the future anyway to the here and now, there is something that I do want to ask you, particularly from your book, because I know that this will also be another pertinent question for people, and to some people maybe even a controversial one. And that is where you talk about companion animals, particularly guide dogs for the disabled, as not sitting right with your ethical and moral compass. And I just wonder if you could expand on this a little bit and suggest some practical workarounds, or what you think.
Yes, my position about companion animals is, first of all, make that distinction between a companion animals and what people call a pet. Mm-hmm. So I think this idea of a pet, which is already an idea that you petting, so you are the one in control, you're the one putting the hand on top of another sentient being and saying, you are mine, do whatever I want. This is what we need to move away from. And that means if you have a relationship with an animal you live with, it should be a companion relationship at equal basis. It's difficult to get that equal basis, but you should try to get it. You should obviously have companion animals that want to be with you, and not just that tolerate you or are there in exchange of food. They really want to be with you. And that's not easy. If you choose any wild animal, you put it in a tank, a fish in a tank, a snake in a terrarium, they don't want to be there. That's why you need the terrarium. So that's why wild animals are not part of this. They cannot be companion animals. They're wild. They're not genetically modified like domestic animals to be more tolerable with the life we live. But domesticated animals, dogs and cats. Well, if you're a vegan, you care about sentient life. The current situation about dogs and cats is there's so many, there's so much uncontrolled breeding. They are all there about to be killed because there's an overpopulation. in the shelter. So rescue them from their death is the right thing to do for a vegan. So rescued domestic animal in giving a good life. But giving a good life as a companion, not as you are the father of that creature. Treating animals with respect also means don't treat them as children. If they are adults, treat them as adults. If they're dog, treat them as dog. Don't treat them as a substitute human being. And that means they have the chance to decide where they want to go for a walk, not just you. They have the chance to decide when they want to go to the work, not just you. And this is not easy to do because we kind of are so accustomed to treat these animals as property. Even those vegans, they're against this concept of property. They might not realize that they almost do treat them as property in the way that they treat them. But what happens with those animals that are specifically bred for a human purpose? That could be fighting, war, finding a bomb, or helping somebody with disabilities. I think the whole idea of breeding anyone, animal, human, anything, for the purpose of a human purpose, this is clearly an exploitation, therefore goes against the principle of ethical veganism. However, that doesn't mean that somebody with a disability cannot have a companion animal. I think we should help anybody with a disability to have the same sort of chances to have companion animals that anybody else. And that should be an effort, a human effort, to be sure nobody with a disability doesn't have that amazing chance to share the life with another sentient being that is not human, which everyone that has had that experience will recognize that is an amazing thing to do. But it's not about breeding an animal for that purpose. It's about helping the human to have another animal, which should be a rescued animal from a shelter. It should not be someone bred into existence for that purpose. It should be just a rescue animal that there are many in need. So I think there are many exceptions to this rule that I apply, and everybody might look at it differently. I might look at it differently if I had that disability myself. I admit that. But from a point of view of theory, breeding anyone for the purpose of assisting somebody with a disability is not consistent with the concept of ethical veganism. But forcing somebody with a disability to never have that relationship that we others have should also be against the principles of veganism, because that might make harm into that person that is already struggling in a world where it's not designed for that person. So I think that's the way I deal with it. But so far, for instance, I haven't got an animal companion at the moment because I don't think I can provide the life that that animal companion deserves. Many people in my situation might say, why not? You have a flood, you can go outside, even if you don't have a garden. But what if I have a job and I have to leave it at home? What if I go to places that they're not allowed? I don't want to force that life to anyone else. I want to live in the conditions where I have that relationship that is as close as possible to a pure companion relationship, knowing that you'll never get to 100% that point, but at least try. That's my way of looking at it.
So, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting view, and obviously something that I believe as well is that you're very right in that no sentient being, nothing really should be bred for the subservience of somebody else or something else. And really the indictment or the critique should be on a society at large which doesn't create access for other humans who have accessibility issues and needs. Because, yeah, on that particular one, when I read it in the book, I mean, at first it kind of was one of those moments where you're reading and I was just like, I have to put a book down and think for a minute. But then I thought to myself that as someone who's also worked in the service industry over the course of my career, even something as simple as having an accessible bathroom or an accessibility ramp to get from one level to another level, like, it's kind of, sometimes it feels like so odd that we have not built things with that in mind in the first instant. I mean, for example, I mean, again, I'm not sure if I said at the top of the conversation here that I'm in the Netherlands where I'm visiting, like, you know, my wife's family. But in traveling here, there are many different train stations, or there was one train station in particular. I'm not going to kind of go into detail, but there was no accessibility, and it meant that without any lift or without a ramp, you kind of have to bring your luggage up the stairs manually. Now, I am lucky enough to be able to do that. But for some people who don't either have the capacity, and it's not even about their luggage, maybe they can't even move themselves, like they would find themselves stuck, or this is a stop that you can't use. And so, I find it an indictment on a society at large that doesn't make those allowances for other people, especially with the kind of the wealth of nations that we have. But again, moving from the social relationships of animals, and while we're here talking a little bit about that, the economic world, to the business relationship with animals, something that a question that has been on my mind since last year. I hosted a discussion called Homegrown at the Tate, and we were talking about the future of food. But one of the people that I talked to was a gentleman called Dale Gibson. He's the founder of Bermondsey Street Bees. He was a former banker, and he explained his philosophy of the symbiotic or economic relationship he has developed with the bees under his stewardship. To surmise, he takes a 5% tax from the bees by way of honey, but not to any extent whereby the bees' natural food source is compromised or needs to be replaced or subsidized. In exchange, he builds hives and makes spaces for the bees to be able to go where they need. So I'm just wondering, can there be any working relationship between animal and human communities as you see it?
That's interesting. To answer this question, I want to see the contract between the bees and this person, and I want to see the signature of the queen bee. If it's not there, that's not really a contract, is it? That's not a big relationship. This is a way to justify exploitation. So you could say that this exploitation is not the same than everybody else's exploitation, because you take an extra care to look for the interests of whoever you exploit. But the word exploit still is part of this equation if there is not a willing relationship from the other side. Now, it's very easy to imagine what we can do for the bees for the benefit, but bees are very different species than humans. So any attempt to kind of simply apply what we need to them is bound to fall short. The needs that the bees need, only the bees know. And we know that the nature of nature is that there's never things done in excess. So if you produce a product in excess, that will be a tax as a species that will make you not survive. Another species that produce the same amount of food in the same environment with less effort will survive, and you get extinct. So therefore, this idea that there is something you could take that will have no effect whatsoever into the colony, I think is a bit false. That the amount of honey that the bees take is the precise amount evolution has created in that particular environment for the bees to survive in a normal way. Doesn't mean that if you take a little bit, it will die. No, but it will be stressed in trying to replenish it. It will be affected in another way. The process of taking the honey, physical process of taking honey, might have a physical effect and a mental effect, because they all have minds, they all have a nervous system, they all are able to make choices. So all that is the combination of all the harms you do is what we call harm in general, and what we try to avoid as vegans. We're not saying we want to avoid the worst harm. We want to avoid just the killing part of harm. We want to avoid any harm. So, and I think the exploitation of any sentient being almost inevitably involves harm, unless there is consent. And that is when you know there is no harm. There is consent. There is evaluation from the other person, the other individual, the other creature, that this relationship is mutualistic. So it's mutual benefit from the both. But we haven't got that consent from the bees. So if we haven't got it,
I hear what you're saying to an extent, but I mean, when you look at it to that extent, I mean, I didn't sign a contract to agree to nationhood, but nationhood ultimately or supposedly protects me with the army, with currency, with government and structure, so that I can then do what I want within it. But ultimately, it is a tax on all of our lives to be like beholden to governments, to nations. And so to your earlier point, it is only part of the cruel world that we all live in. Every one of us is exploited. And so I suppose the point I was asking here, and what the point that he made that I felt maybe had some validity, was they worked out that their exploitation is at 5%. And he said that humans at large, I mean, you get taxed at a minimum of 20%. Like, so they're getting a better deal than others for considering that they have a protection built around them for it. It's not only take, it is also building the hives, creating spaces for the bees and doing things which, sure, they didn't verbally agree to them, but they do benefit from. So I'm just wondering, is there any level at which it's not exploitation?
Well, it's a good point, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing that what that person did. Compare with those that have 10%, 15%, 20% tax, but those that have 1% or 2% are much better to this person, and ones that have 0.1% are much better to those, and the ones that have none are much better to those. The point is, what forces this person to exploit this animal? Is that exploitation necessary for the well-being of this person? Can that person produce similar well-being in other ways? So this idea that exploitation of animals is inevitable is the tenet of carnism. Carnism says we need to exploit animals to be happy, to be healthy, to be fulfilled. And veganism is saying, no, we don't. Therefore, the message of veganism is saying, at the moment there is a sentient being exploited, the bottom line is, have you considered not to do that? And would you be able to survive in a meaningful way if you didn't do that? So if I had a conversation with this person, I'm sure he will be able to say that he was able to do more things than this. He was able to have other ways to enjoy life rather than this. And therefore, if he was able, it was his choice to exploit that animal, not because he needed to, because he wanted to. And therefore, that would be something I would say that's not in line with ethical veganism. But it could be a relationship, your general questions. Yeah, it could, but you need that consent. And sometimes you can get it, because if you have a level of communication with the animals, and that happens often with dogs, that we are evolved so close to each other that we have now many ways to understand each other. You know that the dog that you live with wants you to be there, wants you to be with you. It's quite clear for anyone that has that relationship that is a desire to be together. And then if people abandon this dog, the dog is suffering because he wants to be with that person. You can see it in some individuals, but in others you can't just guess it. You need to have the evidence. And with bees, I never seen a bee saying, I'm happy to be around humans.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, this conversation in particular, I think, could continue opening up and up, because with regards to that, you know, the sentient or that consent from a dog, different again to human structures. One dog who feels that couldn't then sign a decree on behalf of dogs at large,
right,
on an individual basis.
Yes,
but
correct.
Then,
that's precisely correct. Yeah.
But exactly. But then it just makes me think, and again, without going too wide on it, like 17 million people in the UK, like, you know, they decided one thing, but it means that everybody else has to go with them. And so it's not consent from everybody. And so in essence, we're talking about relationships for animals, which would be almost on a pedestal compared to, like, you know, what is, like, you know, the lot for a lot of humans. And I mean, again, this is us in what is meant to be a sophisticated democracy. There are people in countries around the world who would say that, like, you guys are even lucky to have something like a Brexit. Like, you know, we have it even worse than that. At least there was some semblance of a choice, even if, like, you know, the people who represent you are lying to you. I think the question of consent with other sentient beings who don't organize in the same way that humans organize is ultimately a moot point, or, as we were saying, can only ever happen on an individual basis. And so I don't really think, therefore, that the question being that can working relationships exist between human and animal communities, it doesn't stand up, because that even perception of community is a human concept based on our shared values and ideas and beliefs and ethnic backgrounds, whereas with animals it wouldn't work the same. They wouldn't all, like, rally round one religion or one core value. Or so, I mean, I suppose ultimately the idea of animal communities doesn't hold up.
No, I agree, and that's why this idea of in which way within the vegan world we can still exploit animals make no sense, because the whole definition is avoid exploitation whatsoever and try to find ways in a world where everything is exploitation of animals to survive. So now we are vegans, quite happily in the modern 21st century find our ways to have all the alternatives of many of the options that we need to face, not all, but many. And in the future, that will be easier. But that progress towards that vegan world should not be in finding ways to re-exploit those that they are not exploited again. It's the other way around, find ways to avoid exploitation to the ones that we're still exploiting. So this is the direction we should go in. And not to assume, like we were talking about the meat, not to assume that we need something called meat to eat. So let's make another something called meat that doesn't die, or we need some exploitation of animals to work. Let's create another animal worker that is not the same one, or give him different rights. No, avoid the using of animals for work, avoid the using of meat for food, and you'll be happy like many vegans are.
Excellent. Well, I mean, that flip on the head you've talked about, I mean, for this question, it's a bit of a flip as well. And this is about speciesism, which I hope that, you know, all our listeners are aware of and what it means. But I suppose the question I want to ask you as a kind of a bit of a follow-up to that, but maybe a lead on is it speciesist to seek social justice for subsections of humanity? For example, race, gender, wealth, for example, with greater resource and action than, say, seeking that same justice for the insect community or another animal group?
Okay, let me turn your question around for me to answer it. If you ask the question, is it racist to only seek the defense of one particular race and not the others, of one particular race that is being oppressed? But there are many races that are oppressed. It would be racist just to dedicate all the efforts to one of the oppressed race and not the others. And then you'll see that the question changes when you do that, because the general answer, you would say no. You would say yes, in the sense that I will have to avoid racism across all these races. It's no point just to avoid it across one race and not the other. Of course, doesn't mean that you have to work all the time for the races. You work with the ones that you know, the community you are aware of. But doesn't mean that ideologically you oppose those working for the other ones. The same thing with the species. So it will be, for me, speciesist to choose only a particular group of species to help them to have rights, to help them not to be exploited, and ignore the others. Therefore, I think it's an essential part of the philosophy of veganism to treat all the species equally, so to be anti-speciesist, including human beings. But also goes beyond that, because the word species is based in a species, the word race is based in race, but both race and species are both systems of classification of organisms and populations. So in fact, we're talking about populations, group of individuals that have things in common, so we can give them a name, whatever doesn't matter. So if you say you cannot just select a group and decide I'm only going to help these ones and ignore the others, if you want to be consistent in this anti-speciesist approach, but you can also not expect to be able to use all your resources to help everyone. So it makes total sense to use your resources to help the ones that you can help the most, because they're closer to you, because you understand them more, because they are more available to you. But supporting everybody else that does the same with those that are closer to them, that are not the same and closer to you. So opposing anybody else is to help a bee, help a fly, help an insect, because that is not that important to the ones that I'm trying to help. That's wrong. I think you could help the ones you want to help, but you should not oppose others that want to help those that are less help, because there's few people around them understanding who they are. And I think, in a way, with the time, we will not need to ask this question, because it will be enough people trying to help anyone. And we aiming here for equality and equanimity, and equity, equality, and equanimity. So meaning equality, just give everyone the same chance, no matter who they are, in terms of species, gender, race, it doesn't matter. Equity, give more to those that are still not quite there, to be able to balance the same output for everyone. And equanimity, in the end, is for everyone to have a peace of mind, so they don't need to claim, hey, I'm being discriminated, hey, I'm being oppressed. Everybody feel what I got is what I need. And if all creatures in this planet get to that point, we have got the vegan world.
That's pretty fair. I would say. I mean, I think there is a lot of dissonance, cognitive dissonance still, where we have so many of the world's leading environmentalists who are like part of campaigns like saving the whales and stuff, who are not even vegetarian. And it kind of just sometimes surprises me, and it worries me as to how we get to a place where people recognize all of these sentient beings have in essence the same soul, the same whatever word it is that you want to use, that allows for people to kind of like break down in tears, like watching the story of Cecil the lion, for example, or like, you know, elephants in Africa, but as I said, at the same time will be like washing that down like with a McDonald's. And so I just think to myself, how do we go about, I suppose, waking up the general population to the idea that it's almost beyond me when I see Westerners at large, in essence, pointing fingers at stuff like the dog festival in China, or like, you know, different like animals that are eaten in other parts of the world, and kind of like, you know, make that out to be some kind of savagery, when ultimately these are just cultural choices that have been made based on which animals are in greater numbers in different parts of the world. And I just kind of like worry that while that conversation is still something which kind of has so much fuel in it, that people are missing the greater conversation that none of those animals should be included in our food chains.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there is no such a thing as a general population. That each individual will understand the message you send differently. Each culture would do it differently. Each society, that's the first lesson to learn. So you have a message to go out and say, look, we all the same. We all sentient beings. We all suffer. Please do not harm. This is the message of veganism. This is not understood by somebody that doesn't speak English. This is not understood that somebody doesn't know what harm means or sentient beings. You need to go down and modify the message to make it fit to the language, the culture, the idiosyncrasy, and the knowledge of the person. So therefore, you need to be already devising messagings that change in tone and color and emphasis in content, and even in arguments, to make it work differently at different people. And therefore, you need to understand how people tick, what people don't like, and you can just generalize it. But there is a common thing I think we all have. One is we all have cognitive dissonance. All humans have it. We all have the ability to empathize. We all have it. So the good thing is there for everyone. Everybody can be vegan because everybody can tap into this idea of doing no harm. There's nobody born, even a psychopath, I would claim to say, that doesn't understand the concept of doing no harm. But also there is a negative thing that we all have, cognitive dissonance. We always illogical in the way we treat things. We treat one thing using one value, we treat another thing using another value. And this conversation that you and I are having here, that is could be replicated in many languages, in many ways, for different people talking about different questions, is what dismantled that cognitive dissonance. And we all vegans have to assume that when we have got rid of some of the cognitive dissonance that we used to have before we were vegans, we still have some. There's always some in there, and there's never an end to become vegan. So it's always a process that continues. When you make that decision to acquire this attempt to do no harm, you realize that you're still doing a little bit of harm here. You still don't quite understand what the bee thinks. You still don't quite understand what the fly thinks. You still need to progress and be better at this. But it's the idea of trying to be better at this, trying to expand your circle of compassion, and more creatures, more sentient beings in the ones that you won't harm. Every year, add more, not add less, add more. And every time trying to understand more how people read your message and why they react in the ways that you were surprised they reacted to. And the more you do that, the more we'll get, again, to the vegan world.
Excellent, thank you. Well, we've actually kind of come up to an hour already, and so I've got a final question for you, and this one actually is quite specific about an anecdote within your book. And again, I hope it's the kind of anecdote which will drive people to pick up this book this Christmas, this holiday season, Hanukkah, whichever celebration or for whatever reason. But I mean, hopefully this conversation will have inspired people to kind of find out a bit more. But one of the anecdotes in the book which kind of struck me is the one about you saving a wasp from a spider web. Because again, in the anecdote, and I mean, obviously I'm paraphrasing your own story here, but you would assess that the spider was ample-bodied, evidence of other recent captures, and thus didn't need another wasp on its menu. So whilst acknowledging that nature is demonstrably cruel, is that not playing God? And without omniscience, how can you know that you've not caused an even more detrimental chain reaction?
You're right. The answer to the question is that not playing God. The answer is yes, that's playing God. It's not believing I'm God. It's not knowing I'm God. It's just playing God. In the sense that we always play God when we have to make a decision that affects others. We always do that. So we don't use an entire information that we have available to us to make a decision. When we cross the road, we don't ask anybody around, are you sure that you don't want to jump into the road at any moment and I can run over you? You just assume that they probably won't, and you just go and cross it and have you're constantly making decisions that affect others, and therefore you're playing God. But the point is, as long as you know that you are not God, this decision is fallible, you might have made a big mistake, and then that should be fine, because at the same time, you'd have to take responsibility of your presence. What this I mean, you're just not an observer going to this world. We are part of this world. We encounter the wasp encounters you. These are two relationships. I had a 3-point relationship in when I was working through London. A spider, a wasp, and I. The three had the choice. The three had to make decisions. Just because I was human, it's not that I had a better choice than the others, but I could intervene, they could intervene, they could sting me, one could bite me, the other could sting me. Actually, it was quite a dangerous spider, by the way. So we were all in a situation of harming each other. So, and I act in a way that I think minimize the harm in the collective of that scene, knowing I could have made a big mistake, but I make a judgment based on information, based in the nature of the web, seeing a wasp that had been caught recently, had seen the area, knowing the time of the year this spider will easily, very easy finding another wasp or insects. Being a zoologist, using my own knowledge, but also using my memory of my experiences with wasp in my degrees, which made me always feel guilty about the things I did in my experiments with wasp when I was doing my PhD, which means this is my morality. The one thing is the ethics of veganism, do no harm. The other is the morality, how your own experience and things you have in your life mold this ethical thing that we share and make it unique. In my case, my relationship with wasp is unique because I have a guilt problem of having messed with their life in the past, so my tendency is to help the wasp. That's why I would act this way. Other people would not act in that way, and I don't expect people will act as I did. But that's what we do with veganism. We apply an ethical framework where it's the same. That's the one we all agree, and then a moral thing on top of that that is based on our own way of looking at things and our experience. That doesn't contradict that ethical, but it gives an extra color, it gives an extra way to manifest your beliefs in a particular unique way. And that's why I would never judge another vegan that manifests beliefs in different ways than I do. I might say, well, you probably don't belong to the same group that you say you are. You say you're vegan. Well, I'm going to call myself an ethical vegan to make a distinction from you to the others. But I won't tell other people to define themselves different. I will define myself accordingly if I don't feel that I fit. But if it's just the same belief, but it's manifested in different ways, I think that's what we need to find. So otherwise, people will not stick to this belief because they will feel that it's forced upon themselves. Every vegan should feel that veganism is their belief, is their own belief, built by history of ahimsa and other people developing concepts that leads to no harm, and your own thoughts, realizations, the things you read, the things you talk, that make you unique. Is your own belief. That's why nobody can touch it.
Well, thank you. I mean, that was a great kind of a rounding off kind of closing answer. And I think this whole conversation has stood up to that like glowing review, which I gave you and the book, because I think, as I said again, for me, since having read the book, it's definitely opened my eyes to different routes that I can take to refine like certain elements of my own vegan journey. Things which, as you said, we all as humans have cognitive biases and justifications that we give for different choices that we make. But it is about trying to make better decisions and choices every single day, or ones that, again, whether or not we use like, binaries like good and bad or better and worse, but definitely ones that feel progressive, ones that do less harm to more life. And so again, yeah, I just really want to thank you for having this conversation. I think we could have carried on for a lot longer. There's more questions that I had which we didn't kind of get around to, but I'd be more than happy to continue having these conversations with you and to keep on promoting, like, you know, the great message of the ethical vegan. And so, yeah, if you have any last words or any kind of like comments you'd like to share.
Just thank you. I think what you're doing is great. Just to get the conversation going is great. Get the gray areas, talking about the gray areas in a non-judgmental way, in a way that moves you forward. So in the end, because we're getting more diverse, we're going to have more difference of opinion. That is inevitable, because it's different people from different cultural backgrounds and different approaches that look at the same issue. They will have different reactions. But the way we deal with this is what will determine the survival of the movement. If we cope with it well, because we construct from it, from diversity, we construct from different opinion, we judge our own options, we self-criticize, and we build a strong argument, we are progressive. And I think any book of any sort should lead to things like that. Somebody reading it and creating a conversation for others to share. So I must thank you for this opportunity to talk about my book, but especially for you to making people talk, because that's what you're doing with this, on the basis of my book. But the book is just the trigger that creates the conversation. It's the conversation that leads to change. So thanks very much.
Excellent. And I think, yeah, Tim's coming back in just to kind of share some final thoughts. But just to your point there, I think one of the things that has been missing from discourse at large across social media and around the world is conversations been had in good faith. Every question that I asked was with a view to my own edification and a view to learning. And I feel that often now people have discussions to try and pull other people's arguments down rather than to present an argument for themselves. And so, again, I'm grateful to be able to have a conversation in good faith. And I hope that our listeners and other people who are able to tune in and enjoy this conversation will glean the same from it as we have.
Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen. Joel, Jordi, you've been listening intently. It's really interesting. Absolutely second your thoughts, Joel, about being inquisitive, wanting to learn, having supportive, intelligent conversations that are also useful for other people to join in, listen, or lurk and learn from. And to question and be on the same page and to question these things and to progress from the same page instead of coming from poles apart is a really, this is a really important principle for moving forward. We've seen huge fallouts over ethical veganism over the years, and indeed likewise with the intersectional framework. Both have been weaponized, and it's a very refreshing, very encouraging platform that is being developed around ethical veganism, and I think in part very much so because now we have this in print. It kind of doesn't fully define everything. It doesn't. It's almost like the basis for a load of more conversations. And on that note, you'd be both very welcome to come back and join us again. We can explore. Jordi, I've already got a couple of questions for you. One about actually, Joe, which I'm not going to ask us to answer here, but it does involve this is a very much a Western perspective. What about parts of the world where there are absolutely really minimal resources? I was thinking about visiting Sri Lanka, lucky enough to visit Sri Lanka a year after the tsunami 15 years ago, and how those communities have been rebuilt after that complete devastation. We'll come to that another day because there's some really interesting ones. And again, I just second this idea that we're sort of opening up conversations, we're inquisitive, we're asking questions as much as listening to answers and taking these conversations on. So thank you again very much for these. I've got a few already to ask you next time, so I might pinch 20 minutes next time actually, Jay, and jump in and ask Jordi a few questions. But you're very welcome to come back. We're doing activism in about 7 weeks' time, so we might frame a conversation around ethical veganism and how that impacts on activism, as well as some of the issues.
I think this is a growing conversation, definitely. I think, like you said about the book, it's definitely a roadmap, and it's going to need a lot of signposts along the way. So I'm looking forward to being part of that signposting as we go. So thank you, gents, and have a great rest of the day as well.
Cheers, folks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jordi. Tim.
Thank you. Thank you.